at the right speed and altitude. The spacecraft velocity at Drogue deploy is approximately 350 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 18,000 feet. You're getting a live look inside the cabin right now. That's Crew-11 preparing for their re-entry period. Again, having spent 165 days aboard the space station, and when they splash down, capping a 167-day mission. Before they can splash down, though, a little bit more about those parachutes. The next that we will see deploy will be the main parachutes. There are 4 of those. They deploy at approximately 119 miles per hour, or I should say when the spacecraft is traveling about 119 miles per hour, and they deploy at about 65,000 feet. And at splashdown, Dragon is traveling approximately 16 miles per hour, which is a pretty good deceleration from the about 17,500 miles per hour that they were traveling while in Earth orbit with the International Space Station. Now, the highest G load the crew will experience during re-entry is approximately 3 to 5 Gs, so about 3 to 5 times what we are experiencing right now standing on Earth. This view is over the shoulder of Commander Zena Cardman and pilot Mike Fink of the Crew-11 spacecraft. In this view, you can see their crew displays. They're able to monitor everything happening with the spacecraft. However, all the next milestones should be completely autonomous and hands-off for the crew.
And we can preview the fact.
And we just heard that the crew is in entry attitude, and we are anticipating losing this view and losing our audio communications with the crew in just a minute or so as they enter this entry interface. They'll be traveling and experiencing heat outside the capsule at approximately 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And as they are traveling and re-entering Earth's atmosphere, a plasma builds up around the capsule that prevents us from communicating back and forth with the crew. We expect to regain communications with them about 7 minutes later, but we're still getting great views right now.
I love this view over their shoulders because you can see what our pilot and commander can see. They're continuing to follow along with Dragon's progress. As Leah mentioned, we have designed the spacecraft to be completely autonomous. Dragon is flying itself, so they are able to monitor along with everything that's going on. I also want to momentarily point out on the bottom of your screen there, you have some graphical interfaces there.
Since then, we completed the deorbit burn at 1:51. Oh, and you're getting your first views of re-entry. This is live, and if you're in California, you can go see this with your own eyes. This is Crew-11 re-entering after 167 days in space. Again, we are in a loss of signal period. This is a tracked period as the spacecraft re-enters Earth's atmosphere. We anticipate regaining signal with Crew-11 momentarily, and when the spacecraft reaches an altitude of 18,000 feet above Earth, 2 Drogue chutes will deploy to slow it down ahead of the 4 main parachutes deploying at 6,000 feet in altitude. Now, splashdown will be the milestone we will see after that, which is expected for 2:41 a.m. Central Time. So again, we're standing by for acquisition of signal and continued communication with Crew-11, expecting that just a few minutes from now.
Dragon SpaceX, comm check.
SpaceX Dragon, loud and clear.
We have you the same, loud and clear. Expect automated chute deployment.
Copy, automated chute deploy expected.
All right, so there we heard that we had confirmation of that acquisition of signal, or AOS. It actually came in a minute early, so that's good news there. We heard the Corps inform the crew to expect Drogue parachute deployment that happens when Dragon senses the right speed and altitude. So that's roughly about 350 miles per hour and around 18,000 feet in altitude. There we have a view from...
GPS converged. Expect nominal altitude for Drogue chute deploy.
Dragon copies, expecting nominal altitude.
So we'll have that Drogue deploy in about a minute from now, but we have our first views from the WB-57. This is a high-altitude tracking plane that is providing these thermal signatures via infrared. This is really cool to see here as we continue to track Dragon on its way back to planet Earth. So momentarily, we expect for visual and...
Brace for Drogue window.
Current brace.
Dragon has safed the propulsion system as we anticipate Drogue deployment any moment now. Drogue parachutes are utilized to stabilize and decelerate the vehicle further prior to deployment of the main parachutes. Drogue should be deploying here in a couple seconds, and mains will follow in about 1 minute. There we have visual confirmation of Drogue deploy.
Visual, 2 healthy Drogues.
Kind of a cool
Dragon
shot.
copies.
I think we had the recovery vessel in the background there just momentarily. Main parachutes deploying in about 20 seconds. The main parachutes deploy when the vehicle is about 119 miles per hour and around 6,000 feet. There we can see visual confirmation of deployment of the 4 mains.
Visual, 4 healthy mains.
These main parachutes help decelerate the spacecraft even further. So they deploy around 119 miles per hour, and they'll decelerate it down to about 15, 16 miles per hour. And that will be the speed in which the spacecraft is traveling upon splashdown. Once again, we're anticipating splashdown at 12:41 a.m.
Meters.
Copy, 1,000.
We'll now begin to hear Crew-11 Commander Zena Cardman call out the altitude from her seat there in Dragon Endeavour. SpaceX's mission control team in Hawthorne continues to report the precise landing coordinates to the recovery team.
800.
Copy, 800.
Those main parachutes now fully reefed or inflated. We ensure that the parachutes inflate over a few seconds to help reduce the shock to the system.
600 meters.
Copy, 600.
All around great views of Dragon Endeavour as it continues its way back to Earth.
Copy, 400. Crew are braced.
Standing by for splashdown. Splashdown of Crew-11. After 167 days in space, Dragon and NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Mike Fink, Kimya Yui of JAXA, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov are back on Earth.
Dragon, SpaceX, we see splashdown.
SpaceX Dragon, copy, concur, splashdown, and mains are cut. We are in 4.800.
SpaceX copies, and we see the same. Mains cut. On behalf of SpaceX and NASA, welcome home, Crew-11.
SpaceX Dragon, it's so good to be home. With deep gratitude to the teams who got us there and back.
Vehicle safety verifications in progress. We'll report back when recovery personnel are en route.
Dragon copies.
Again, we have splashdown of NASA's SpaceX Crew-11 mission, a 167-day mission, 165 of those being spent on board the International Space Station, now splashing down off the coast of California. That splashdown coming right on time at 2:41 a.m. Central Time. The SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon splashdown, and they will now begin making their way to the splashdown location. It looks like we even have a couple of visitors around the spacecraft. If you look very closely, you might even see some dolphins. Again, a return by the books for Crew-11, having splashed down at 2:41 a.m. Central Time off the coast of California. We will now begin moving into the recovery process. We'll see the boats begin to approach and inspect the spacecraft by checking for hypergol and other ordnance checks. They will begin to rig the spacecraft and prepare it to be lifted on that recovery ship. And this is a great view of some of those boats that go out and check the spacecraft. They are going to be sniffing it, essentially, for these hazardous fuels that can linger once the spacecraft has re-entered Earth's atmosphere.
SpaceX Dragon, 4.800, Section 3. We are in Stable 1.
SpaceX copies. Stable 1.
That's the voice of NASA astronaut and commander of Crew-11, Zena Cardman, reporting back that they are working through their procedures and that the capsule is in stable 1, which is the position that you see on your screen here, where it is upright in the water. This is just what we were hoping for, and again, it's been a completely nominal and by-the-books return for the crew today. This is a live view of Crew-11 aboard Dragon from the SpaceX recovery vehicle, or from the SpaceX recovery ship. And this day for the crew started about 10.5 hours ago when they undocked from the International Space Station. SpaceX recovery teams have been given the go to approach.
SpaceX is go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in 1 minute.
Copy, 1 minute. Thank you.
And you just heard that call out from the Corps in Hawthorne, California, to the crew aboard Dragon that the SpaceX personnel who have been in the general vicinity of Dragon's anticipated splashdown location now have the go to approach the spacecraft and begin that recovery process.
All right, so as we heard, we are now standing by for recovery of the Dragon Endeavour spacecraft with NASA astronaut Zena Cardman and Mike Fink, Kimia Yui of JAXA, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov, who are inside that spacecraft that you see there. Now, Dragon I would also like to point out, we've got some folks here approaching the spacecraft now that they have gotten the okay for the approach. They're on some fast boats there. This is the SpaceX recovery team. Personally, one of my favorite teams to work with here at SpaceX. They're a really scrappy crew, and they're going to work really quickly here to get the Crew-11 team out of the water. And it's always a lot of fun to watch these operations proceed. Now, Dragon has already autonomously completed several steps to safe itself following splashdown. For those of you that perhaps just joined us, the return has gone very smoothly so far, as Leah had mentioned. Dragon successfully splashed down off the coast of San Diego, California at 12:41 a.m. Pacific time, 3:41 a.m. Eastern time. Approximately 10.5 hours prior to splashdown, Dragon autonomously undocked from the International Space Station, completed a series of departure burns, jettisoned its trunk section, and performed its final burn, which was the Deorbit burn, and that placed itself on a trajectory toward Southern California, specifically off the coast of San Diego. So Dragon successfully re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, followed by deployment of its parachutes to slow the spacecraft down to a gentle splashdown. So we're now going to follow the final part of the crew's journey as the Dragon spacecraft is lifted out of the water and placed on the recovery boat. So we see here the recovery team beginning to prepare. One of the most important steps will be to
Dragon SpaceX, hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks, nominal. Rigging in progress, approximately 2.5 minutes until capsule lift. Stand by for PMC. The next call you hear will be from SpaceX flight surgeon on Dragon to ground private.
Dragon copies. 2.5 minutes until lift. Standing by for PMC.
All right, we heard there that the crew will have an opportunity for a private medical conference with the flight surgeon. That is standard for all of our crew returns. That will be done on a private channel. Great view here from the drone. This is our first look at the front side of Dragon Endeavour. I love this view because you can see the lights on the inside. This crew member here is actually on the capsule, beginning to place the rigging required for the lift onto the large recovery vessel. This takes a few minutes to essentially lasso and wrangle the Dragon capsule as it gently bobs there in the water. Not in the picture, there is another fast boat that is recovering the parachutes from the water. Those were automatically cut or released from Dragon upon splashdown, and we retrieved those from the water. This fast boat here is helping to assist the rigging of the required straps and equipment for the spacecraft recovery.
Dragon, SpaceX, Dragon aground is no longer privatized.
Dragon copy.
SpaceX recovery team continues to maneuver around Dragon Endeavour as we continue progress of placing the recovery straps required in order to safely lift the spacecraft out of the water. Something we heard called out earlier prior to the closest approach that we see now was completion of the safety sweeps. That was just indicating that the recovery team performed the required checks to ensure that there weren't any unfired pyros, which are used to...
Dragon, be advised, transitioning forward link. COM will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
Earlier, prior to atmospheric reentry, we heard SpaceX core report to the crew during the during the entry brief that recovery conditions were almost pristine, and he was not joking. It seems that the weather, the waves are pretty smooth out there. And Leah mentioned earlier that there are some dolphins out to play as well. Perhaps we might be able to get to see those as the recovery vessel gets a little closer to the spacecraft. On your screen now are our operators at SpaceX Mission Control. They continue to monitor Dragon Endeavour during these recovery operations, as well as communicate directly to the recovery team. Everything is carefully coordinated within our procedures, and here you see folks that are responsible for individual portions to ensure that everything is executed as planned. If you've just recently joined us, we had a perfectly nominal re-entry of Dragon Endeavour. The crew splashed down exactly on time at 12:41 a.m. Pacific time off the coast of San Diego. The recovery team has arrived at the splashdown location and are placing the required straps onto the Dragon spacecraft. The crew are safely inside. Nobody is allowed to pass go just yet. We still have to lift the spacecraft out of the water and onto our recovery vessel.
Dragon SpaceX, forward link transition complete. Comm check.
We've got you loud and clear.
We have you the same.
Hopefully we'll be able to bring those views of the recovery team back. But at this point, I can share that one member of the recovery team is still, there we can see our recovery vessel continuing to approach Dragon Endeavour there in its splashdown location. We still have one recovery team member working to apply the rigging to the capsule. You can see that work ongoing there. As we've seen, this involves climbing on top of the spacecraft itself to attach these hoist rings and connect the lifting lines. Overall, the progress tonight has been very smooth and very rapid. Depending on the sea state, it can take us a little bit longer, but things are really smooth this evening, and the recovery team is very efficient. It takes us less than an hour to raise Dragon onto the recovery vessel and remove the crew from the spacecraft. After initial medical checkouts, the crew will return to land within 4 hours by helicopter. So everything continuing to proceed as scheduled and as anticipated. The ring that you see there on the deck of the of the recovery vessel, that is what we refer to as the nest. That is where the Dragon, once lifted out of the water using the hydraulic lift there at the aft end of the recovery vessel, the Dragon spacecraft will be lifted and placed into that nest, and that nest will then be translated forward on the recovery vessel up to where the egress the egress bay is located. Yeah, so this is a great view there of the recovery team member that is responsible for placing the hoist straps and the rigging required to lift the the Dragon spacecraft out of the water, along with the recovery team members located in the fast boat, helping to provide the necessary light, as this is obviously a nighttime splashdown operation. We've done several of these before. As you can see there, the sea state is super calm, and I'm assuming really nice conditions to be working in right now. Over time, we can see the primary recovery vessel. This is our recovery vessel Shannon, named after, of course, Shannon Walker, who flew on Crew-11. She is the first female astronaut to fly in our Dragon spacecraft. So we have this vessel named after her. And we can see Shannon slowly but surely getting closer and closer to Dragon Endeavour as it patiently waits there in the glass-like water. Once all the required straps and rings are in place and the recovery vessel is in its location and everything is attached, we'll actually see that recovery team member jump off from the capsule and into the water. It's one of my favorite moments of the recovery process. I think we might, yep, there they are. The dolphins are back to play. We now have a better view of them. I'm sure they're very intrigued by all the lights that are in the area here in the middle of the night in Southern California. If you've just recently joined us, you're tuning in at a great time. We're in the final phases of the Crew-11 return to Earth. They had an on-time splashdown at 12:41 a.m. Pacific time, 3:41 a.m. Eastern time. And as you can see, recovery operations are proceeding very well. Everything is going according to plan, or as we like to say around here, nominal. And we can see the recovery vessel continues to approach Dragon Endeavour and the recovery team there on the vessel standing by as we await the hoist of the Dragon spacecraft onto the aft end of the vessel. I can say once we make the final approach here to the Dragon spacecraft, the hoisting actually happens. It always takes me by surprise just how fast it is, because you can't really see the full size of the hydraulic lift or hoist there at the aft end of the recovery vessel, but it's pretty big and pretty strong. So we're able to lift the spacecraft out of the water. We can see there that the lines, the guidelines are attached, and they're going to line everything up here for the final approach and ultimately the lift into the nest there located at the back of the vessel. So we can see Dragon Endeavour, the gap is closing between Dragon Endeavour and our recovery vessel Shannon. Once again, we had an on-time splashdown off the coast of San Diego, California, that occurred at 12:41 a.m. Pacific time. All 4 crew members of Crew-11 are still in our Dragon spacecraft. Moments ago, when the spacecraft was turned the other way, we could actually see
Dragon SpaceX. Rigging complete. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
Dragon copies. 5 minutes to lift.
All right, good call out there. Just keeping the crew there inside Dragon Endeavour apprised of the timeline. While there are windows, it is a little hard to see exactly everything that's going on outside of those windows at this point, as there is quite a bit of action as we have been following along. We can see now that the hydraulic lift has been extended into the initial lifting position. And this is the mechanism that will bring Dragon out of the water and onto the nest there at the back of the recovery vessel. We'll also see the recovery team member. I think you can still, yeah, you can still see them there on the front. They're actually standing in the bay where the main parachutes are stored. That's quite a large bay. Now they're climbing up to the top, and shortly we'll see them make some final adjustments and a final graceful flying departure from Dragon Endeavour.
Brace for capsule lift.
Crew bracing.
Now, as you can see, the recovery teams are preparing to lower the vessel's hydraulic lift mechanism, and that's going to bring the spacecraft into the on-deck translation system, also known as the nest. Dragon will remain in the nest during crew extraction and then for the journey back to port. Again, all of this coming right after splashdown at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, right on time, and a really expedient recovery, partially thanks to the calm sea states and great weather that is out in the San Diego area right now, but also due to the swift and very well skilled and practiced efforts of the NASA and SpaceX recovery teams. The spacecraft is now being lifted. It'll be set on the nest and centered. It'll be oriented so that the side hatch is facing forward for the crew to egress. It'll be moved into the hangar underneath that helipad that you see illuminated in green on the top of the ship, and then pulled towards the mezzanine area so that the crew can be helped outside of the hatch. Once open, a SpaceX medical doctor will be the first to check in on Cardman. Fink, Yui, and Platonov are Crew-11 crew members, and see if they're ready for egress or exiting the vehicle. This is a standard procedure for all of our crew returns. This view coming from the recovery vessel, as you see Dragon, and at the very bottom, that is the nest in which we were discussing, and that's where Dragon will remain now and all the way back to port. You can also see, facing forward, that is Dragon's side hatch we were discussing. This is the same hatch they used to enter the spacecraft on launch day in August. And of course, this is different from the top hatch. You can not see that because it's underneath the nose cone at the very top of the spacecraft. We've been following along all the way through deorbit burn and nose cone closure tonight. That top hatch underneath the nose cone is what the astronauts and cosmonaut used to enter and exit the International Space Station while Dragon was docked. So before we open this side hatch, the spacecraft's cabin pressure must be equalized with the outside environment. And of course, once that hatch is open, this will be the crew's first breath of fresh air back on Earth since boarding their spacecraft at the start of their journeys back in August. Again, a very by-the-book return for Crew-11 tonight. Everything nominal, as we often use, meaning it's normal and as planned and as expected. Splashdown happening at 2:41 a.m. Central. This swift recovery getting them on the boat. It's now 3:10 a.m. Central.
Dragon SpaceX, welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing their final checks and stand by for translation to the egress platform.
Dragon copies.
Now that voice speaking with the astronauts and cosmonaut on the Dragon spacecraft is still coming from the core in SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. These team members are making sure that all thrusters are covered before they begin to maneuver the spacecraft toward that egress platform. We'll be standing by live the entire time. This is the sixth flight of this spacecraft. In all, Endeavour has flown 9 NASA astronauts, 3 visitors to the International Space Station, 2 Roscosmos cosmonauts, 1 retired NASA astronaut, 1 ESA astronaut, and an Emirati astronaut from the UAE to and from the International Space Station. Again, this is the 6th mission for this Dragon spacecraft named Endeavour. First launching on May 30th, 2020 to the International Space Station. And if you remember that date, that was the historic Demo 2 mission for the Commercial Crew Program, carrying NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. What you're seeing here are SpaceX team members. They are preparing the vehicle to be moved to that egress platform, making sure everything is safe, that the rigging is properly attached. This is really the final ride on Dragon for these Crew-11 crew members. One short trip to this egress platform, and then they'll begin being assisted out of the spacecraft. Completely normal procedures for all of our returns. And this is a live view from Mission Control in Houston, Texas, the International Space Station Flight Control Room. We have some additional visitors beyond the usual flight controllers and flight directors that staff this room 24/7. In the center of your screen, you'll see NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman speaking with team members, specifically right now the Spartan flight controller. Isaacman is, of course, an accomplished astronaut himself, having flown on 2 missions aboard Dragon, so he is familiar with these procedures and what the crew might be experiencing right now. Back on the recovery ship, the teams continue to prepare to move Dragon to that egress platform. We'll get ready to officially welcome home the Crew-11 astronauts and cosmonaut. Again, that's NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Mike Fink, JAXA's astronaut Kimya Yui, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov, wrapping up a 167-day in space for these crew members. Again, if you're just joining us, thanks for tuning in. This is the live mission coverage of NASA's SpaceX Crew-11 mission returning from the International Space Station back to Earth. As you can see, this is the Dragon spacecraft, and splashdown occurred at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, right on time. This crew undocked at 4:20 p.m. Central Time, so it was about a 9.5-hour ride from space back to Earth. They wrapped up 165 days aboard the International Space Station, 167 days in total for this mission. And we are seeing motion for Dragon. They are pulling it to the egress platform. It's a short distance, and this view coming from that platform itself. This will align it properly with the side hatch, where we will see the astronauts egress or exit the capsule. They will be assisted after being checked on by a medical doctor, and this is standard procedure for all of our returning crews. We are getting confirmation that the spacecraft hatch is ready to be opened. Again, this will be the first time
for side hatch opening and egress. It's been an honor flying with you.
Standing by for side hatch, and the honor is ours. Thank you so much.
Good words from the Corps in SpaceX Mission Control to the crew. Again, with this side hatch open, this is the first breath of fresh air that this crew has gotten in 167 days since their launch back in August. That hatch opening coming at 3:19 a.m. Central Time, and with a splashdown occurring at 2:41 a.m. Central Time, a pretty rapid access of the crew. As previously discussed, the first team member to check on the crew is a SpaceX medical doctor, just giving them a once-over, making sure everyone's feeling all right and ready to exit the spacecraft. This is something we do with all crew members who return. And getting a quick picture inside the capsule is NASA photographer Bill Ingalls. Hey, there's your live view inside Dragon Crew-11 back on Earth after 167 days in space. Again, next on the checklist for tonight is crew egress or exit. Team members will be assisting them as they are helped out of the spacecraft. Again, it's been 167 days since they were back on Earth, so our standard procedure will be followed here as well, where they are assisted out of the spacecraft and placed on essentially a gurney, and then they will receive some medical checks aboard the ship before flying back to land. Team members inside the spacecraft from SpaceX's recovery team are helping remove some of those extra items that are in the spacecraft. You just saw the footrests being handed off. This will just make it easier for us to bring the crew out of the spacecraft. Just over 40 minutes since our crew splashed down off the coast of San Diego. Again, that coming at 2:41 a.m. Central Time. We are expecting to see them exiting the spacecraft very soon. That's the chair the crew members will be helped into and moved back for their initial medical checks. Again, standard procedure for any returns on Dragon, as well as any of our crew members returning. If you've ever watched a crew return on a Soyuz spacecraft, we have a similar process where astronauts are carried from the capsule to waiting chairs and then carried again to a nearby medical tent. Again, you're watching live coverage of Crew-11's mission and return from the International Space Station, having undocked at 4:20 p.m. Central Time on January 14th, just yesterday, and splashing down at 2:41 a.m. Central Time today, January 15th. We are now just awaiting the crew to be helped out of the spacecraft. And it looks like our first crew member out of the spacecraft is NASA astronaut Mike Fink. Yes, that's the pilot of the Crew-11 mission aboard Dragon. Fink now being taken to those standard medical checks. And since we just saw Mike Fink, it's worth noting he now has 549 total days in space. That's the fourth all-time most days for NASA astronauts. Standing by for our next crew member to exit the spacecraft. That's NASA astronaut Zena Cardman, wrapping up her first mission to space, commander of the Crew-11 spacecraft. That's another footrest being handed out of the capsule, and we'll be standing by to see who is next to be brought out of the spacecraft. Again, you see them being helped onto these stretchers. They are being escorted back to their routine medical checks. Our next crew member to exit the spacecraft is JAXA's astronaut Kimya Yui. Yui just reached the milestone of 300 days in space across 2 missions. You can see some cheering on the SpaceX recovery ship, and you can probably also hear a little bit of celebration here in Mission Control Houston as well. That's another foot restraint, or a foot rest, I should say, being brought out of the spacecraft, clearing the way for our final crew member to exit, and that will be Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov. And we see the 4th crew member of Crew-11 being helped from the vehicle now. That is Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov, also wrapping up his first mission to space. Now that NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Mike Fink, Kimya Yui of JAXA, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the medical teams, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. This cruise journey concludes following a launch on August 1st, 2025, aboard a Falcon 9 rocket to the International Space Station. It was the 4th flight for Fink, who now has 549 days in space, the 2nd for Yui with 309 days in space, and the 1st flight for Cardman and Platonov, who now have 167 days in space. With their mission coming to an end, the crew began packing up their research and personal items for the return to Earth last week. The Soyuz MS-28 crew, including NASA astronaut Chris Williams and Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Kutsverchkov and Sergei Mikheyev, remain aboard the space station and will continue their mission through this summer. Crew-12 is currently scheduled to launch as soon as mid-February and will provide more information once that is available.